I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow.
In this video, we're going to talk about something that shook the entire world just days ago. King Charles III fell seriously ill, and his son Prince William had to step up in ways no one expected. We'll explore every single detail of what happened behind those castle walls, how William handled this massive responsibility, and what it means for the future of Britain's royal family. Stay with me until the very end, because the way this story unfolds will show you what true leadership really looks like. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below telling me what you think about Prince William's actions and which country you're watching from right now. Let's get started. It all began with just 12 simple words that made an entire country freeze in shock. The message from Buckingham Palace came out at exactly 8:45 in the morning on October 20th, 2025. It said that King Charles was getting urgent medical help at Windsor Castle. Those few words sent chills through Britain like nothing else could. Within minutes, news cameras rushed to the castle gates, and the sound of camera shutters replaced the peaceful morning bird songs. The world had just learned that King Charles III was very sick, and everyone's attention immediately turned to his son, Prince William. The palace's statement was short and formal, written in that careful, official language they always use. It said the king would pause all his public appearances while still handling important government work when possible. But even though these were the usual reassuring words the palace uses during tough times, something felt different this time. The heaviness behind those words was impossible to ignore. As I watched the announcement being shown over and over on every screen, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just another break in the royal schedule. Something much deeper had changed. Outside Windsor Castle, thick fog rolled low over the gates, the kind that swallows up all sound and makes everything feel eerily quiet. News reporters in long coats whispered their updates into microphones, while people watching from outside held flowers without really knowing why they brought them. Inside those massive walls, Prince William had reportedly arrived before the sun even came up. His car slipped quietly past the crowd, with his face hidden behind dark tinted windows. But people who saw him said there was a strange stillness about him, the kind you see in someone who's either gathering their strength or preparing for heartbreak. For many years, William had been trained to be a leader, but no amount of training could truly prepare him for this exact moment, the one where he has to balance his love for his father with his duty to serve his country. Somewhere inside Windsor's cold stone hallways, a single major decision was waiting for him. One that could change not just how the monarchy works, but how the entire nation feels about their royal family. What do you think was going through William's mind as he walked those corridors, knowing everything had changed overnight? Just 2 weeks before all this happened, the atmosphere around Buckingham Palace had been completely different and happy. King Charles and Prince William had stood together at the Natural History Museum in London, opening a new environmental exhibit for an important climate initiative. The cameras captured what many people described as a rare warmth between father and son, Charles briefly placing his hand on William's shoulder, William smiling with the quiet pride of a man finally being recognized as his father's equal. Nobody in that crowd of diplomats and schoolchildren could have possibly imagined that within just days, these same two men would trade speeches for silence and celebration for crisis. Inside the palace, things started to shift quietly in early October. Palace workers noticed the king canceling more appearances than usual, saying he was exhausted after a particularly busy summer. It wasn't completely unusual, since Charles had always been incredibly hard-working, almost to a fault. But the cancellations started coming closer and closer together. His smiles got shorter, his pauses got longer. Even his famously neat desk at Clarence House started getting messy with half-signed letters and briefing papers left sitting there. To someone who didn't know him well, it seemed like nothing. But to the people who worked with him every day, it was the first crack in his lifelong pattern of being perfectly organized and on time. Can you imagine noticing these small changes and realizing something serious was happening? When the medical team finally told him he urgently needed rest, the decision to move him to Windsor Castle made sense both practically and symbolically. Windsor had always been his safe place, where he went when the world felt too overwhelming. It was also the fortress where duty and privacy could exist together, at least in theory. But as news spread through the royal network, a different kind of preparation began. Advisors quietly started reviewing the rules about the counselors of state, the small group of people who are allowed to act in the monarch's place during illness or absence. William's name, of course, was at the top of that list. That evening, as the lights of Windsor flickered behind rain-soaked windows, William sat across from his father in a private study lined with family photographs. Charles, looking pale but still alert, pointed toward the familiar red box of government papers. "It's all yours for now," he reportedly said, his voice steady but fragile. William hesitated before taking it, a gesture that marked the beginning of a quiet transfer of power. Outside, the crowd still waited, completely unaware that within those stone walls, the monarchy itself had shifted into a new phase, one where a son must lead even as his father still lives. How would you feel taking on such enormous responsibility while your father lay sick nearby? The first real sign that something was seriously wrong didn't come from any official announcement. It came from what regular people noticed on their own. In the days leading up to October 20th, people who follow the royal family closely started pointing out strange changes. Prince William's schedule of appearances, which used to be packed and predictable, suddenly shifted. 2 appearances were cancelled within 48 hours, both without any explanation given. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, went alone to a children's hospital visit. Her composure was flawless as always, but her smile seemed faint and distant. To most people, it just looked like normal schedule changes. But for those who follow the monarchy closely, it was the kind of silence that speaks volumes. At Kensington Palace, people on the inside spoke of a tension that was hard to describe. Staff moved quickly and purposefully. Phones buzzed more than usual, and security seemed unusually tight. A member of the housekeeping team later remembered seeing William's private car leave the residence at 5:30 in the morning, headed for Windsor. He hadn't been scheduled to go there that morning. "It felt different," she quietly told a journalist later. Like something important was beginning. And she was absolutely right. The shift was already happening. By the afternoon of October 19th, social media had caught on to something being wrong. Hashtags like Rona Royal Silence and Dola Dok Windsor Update started trending on X and TikTok. Amateur investigators online compiled clips of recent royal appearances, carefully analyzing body language, eye contact, and even pauses in speeches. One post that went viral claimed, "Prince William looks like a man carrying the entire world on his shoulders." Another asked bluntly, "Is the king sicker than they're telling us?" That night, when Buckingham Palace lights burned far past midnight, the speculation reached its peak. A YouGov overnight poll found that 67% of British people believed Prince William should temporarily take on expanded duties if the king's condition continued to get worse. International news outlets like CNN and France. 64 echoed the same idea that the future of the monarchy now rested on William's steadiness, not Charles's experience. I still remember scrolling through those headlines myself and realizing how quickly the story had changed. 1 week earlier, William was just the supportive son. Now he was the man the entire world expected to lead. The transformation wasn't officially announced. It simply happened quietly in the collective mind of the public. Throughout all of this, Catherine's presence became the kingdom's emotional anchor. She was seen leaving Windsor in her black Range Rover, driving the children herself. One local photographer captured a moment where she paused at the gate, her hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on something unseen. "She looked calm," he said, "but there was a kind of sadness in that calm. What do you think keeps someone like Catherine so strong during such difficult times?" Inside Windsor, William divided his hours between family and duty. Doctors came and went discreetly. Advisors briefed him in soft voices, yet he still found time to step outside in the cool October air. One witness described seeing him on the long walk just before dawn, standing completely alone with his phone pressed to his ear, head bowed. No security team, no cameras, just a man waiting for news that could change his entire life. By sunrise on October 20th, the palace communications team was in complete lockdown mode. Draft statements were revised every hour, each one carefully measured to project stability without giving false reassurance. No one wants to say too much, an insider told the Times newspaper. But saying too little now feels like lying. Outside, the world was already writing its own version of the story. In cafes from London to Sydney, televisions replayed clips of William arriving at Windsor. Commentators praised his composure and his quiet authority, the way he appeared both princely and painfully human at the same time. People began to talk about him the way they once spoke of his mother Diana, as a symbol of empathy in a family known for being emotionally restrained. And here's where I want to bring you into this conversation. When you see Prince William stepping into this role, balancing his father's illness with the nation's expectations, what do you feel? Do you see strength, sadness, or simply duty being now fulfilled? Drop your thoughts in the comments and tell us which city or country you're watching from, because tonight the eyes of the entire world are on Windsor, and your voice is part of this story. How can someone carry so much weight and still appear so calm? The question now wasn't whether William could lead, but whether he could carry the emotional weight of Britain's crown before it was even officially his to wear. The answer, as we'll soon discover, might not lie in the speeches he gives, but in the moments of silence between them. Behind the palace gates, the crisis unfolded in almost complete silence. Reporters outside Windsor had little more than recycled images and repeated quotes to work with, but inside, a delicate operation was already underway. At Clarence House, Queen Consort Camilla coordinated with private secretaries and medical staff, her every movement shadowed by aides carrying sealed folders. Camilla had spent decades navigating royal storms, but this was completely different. Every word, every breath that left the palace would be picked apart and analyzed by the entire world. And so, she moved like someone walking across glass. Graceful, deliberate, and terrified of the noise a single wrong step could make. At 10 hank in the morning, the first internal meeting began. Around the table sat the King's senior physician, Sir Hugh Thomas, the Lord Chamberlain, 2 private secretaries, and Prince William himself. The curtains were half drawn, dimming the October light. Papers rustled softly as the doctor spoke. "His Majesty remains conscious and stable," he said, "but we must prepare for a period of limited capacity." That phrase hung in the air, bureaucratic, precise, yet absolutely terrifying in what it implied. William leaned forward with his hands clasped together. "What does that mean exactly?" he asked. The doctor hesitated before responding. "It means we monitor hour by hour." The moment those words reached him, William understood what the palace could never say out loud. His father wasn't gone, but the weight of the crown was already shifting onto his shoulders. From that hour forward, Camilla and William became the 2 visible faces of an invisible transition. While she managed the king's comfort and well-being, William became the operational center of the monarchy. His schedule filled instantly with briefings, one on government correspondence, another on the upcoming Commonwealth Summit, and a third, perhaps the most symbolic, on the red box of state papers. It was still technically his father's, yet William's signature was beginning to appear more and more often on the documents inside. Outside the palace, journalists sensed this change happening. By afternoon, major British television networks had switched to continuous coverage. The BBC ran a live news ticker titled "The Crown in Waiting." Sky News displayed footage of Windsor's gates glowing under soft floodlights, occasionally cutting to commentators who spoke in hushed, respectful tones. "This is a moment we've seen, rehearsed but never actually lived through," one royal correspondent observed. "The heir is in effect already leading." Even foreign media softened their tone. The New York Times wrote, "Britain finds itself in an interlude, not yet mourning, but already adjusting." In France, Le Monde called it une transition silencieuse, a silent transition. The global press coverage mirrored the palace's own strategy. No big declarations, only subtle suggestions. And behind every headline, one question kept appearing. How long could this silence hold the kingdom together? What would you do if you suddenly had to lead while someone you love fought for their health? Late that night, William retreated briefly to a private study at Windsor. The fireplace had burned low, casting warm amber light across the bookshelves. On the wall hung portraits of his grandmother and great-grandfather, Elizabeth II and George VI, both of whom had faced their own nights of deep uncertainty. William sat alone, flipping through a file marked State Continuity. It contained letters of instruction his father had signed months earlier, each one explaining in detail what to do in the event of temporary inability to serve. One note, handwritten in Charles's distinctive looping handwriting, simply read, "Serve with steadiness, not fear." I can only imagine what must have run through his mind in that moment. The son who had watched his mother's coffin pass through London streets was now finding himself standing at the threshold of another life-changing transformation. He wasn't taking the crown, not yet, but the entire machinery of kingship was already turning around him like gears in motion. Downstairs, Camilla was speaking quietly with advisors. Aides described her manner as controlled, but deeply tired. At one point, she asked to step outside for some fresh air. Witnesses saw her standing in the courtyard with her arms folded against the cold, watching the windows of the king's private rooms. A soft light flickered behind the curtains. She didn't cry, at least not in front of the staff, but the expression on her face was one of a woman trying to balance grief with royal protocol. As midnight approached, another draft statement was reviewed and revised. Its language was cautious, written and rewritten by a small team of communications officials. His Majesty remains under medical supervision at Windsor Castle, it read. The Prince of Wales continues to oversee royal engagements on behalf of the Crown. The words were technically true, yet carefully incomplete in what they revealed. William approved the final version without changing a single line. Sometimes, as they say, silence is the most powerful form of speech. Can you feel the weight of trying to comfort a nation while your own heart is breaking? Outside, the rain began to fall again, tapping softly against the palace windows. A group of journalists huddled under umbrellas, their breath visible in the autumn chill. From the road beyond the gates, someone began playing God Save the King on a violin. The notes floated through the fog, fragile and haunting. Inside, the red box was delivered to William's desk once more. The palace lights stayed on long after midnight, their glow reflected on the wet cobblestones below. And as the clock struck 1 in the morning, the heir to the throne sat alone at his father's desk, pen in hand, preparing to sign documents in the king's name for the very first time. It wasn't a coronation, nor was it an abdication, just the quiet passing of responsibility from one trembling hand to another. By the morning of October 21st, the quiet dignity that had covered Windsor like a blanket shattered into a wave of global attention. The palace statement from the night before, brief, somber, and signed with William's authorization, had reached every corner of the planet. News anchors spoke in hushed voices, their tone somewhere between reverence and alarm. On social media, the phrase "acting monarch" began trending everywhere, even though the palace had never actually used those words. To millions of people watching from around the world, it no longer mattered what the official language was. The shift was happening in real time, and Prince William was now carrying the weight of an entire nation's heartbeat. By mid-morning, crowds had gathered at Buckingham Palace and along the Long Walk at Windsor. Candles flickered among a sea of umbrellas. Photographs of Charles and William were taped to fences like small offerings and prayers. Some people carried signs reading, "We stand with you, William," while others simply held handwritten prayers and well wishes. It was an image that felt strangely familiar, echoing the days after Princess Diana's death, except this time, the man at the center of it all was no longer the child walking behind the coffin, but the adult who must now lead. The digital world moved faster than ever before. Within hours, clips of William's last public appearances resurfaced across TikTok and Instagram. Moments from charity visits, speeches about duty, and a haunting quote from his 2022 address. Leadership begins with compassion. The hashtag #ChootPrayForTheKing trended across continents alongside Jeffbo, Prince William, and Despo, the future monarch. Google searches for King Charles' health spiked nearly 800% overnight. I'll admit, even for someone used to watching royal headlines, the sheer scale of this moment felt completely unprecedented. It wasn't just a British story anymore. It had become a global vigil, a worldwide moment of collective concern. Do you remember where you were when you first heard this news? Across the Atlantic Ocean, American television networks scrambled to adjust their programming. Morning shows in New York opened with shots of Windsor's gray, cloudy skies. A CNN anchor described William as the reluctant hero of a monarchy at a crossroads. In Paris, Le Figaro praised his composure, while in Sydney, Australia, Crowds gathered outside the British consulate with flowers and handwritten notes of support. The world has seen monarchies rise and fall, one commentator noted, but rarely do we see one transition through grace rather than catastrophe. Inside Windsor, William had barely slept at all. His day began before sunrise, reading dispatches from Downing Street and Commonwealth representatives who had sent messages of concern and support. Around 10 in the morning, he met with the Lord Chamberlain to finalize arrangements for upcoming state functions, many of which he would now personally preside over. Staff members described him as calm and methodical, but emotionally drained. "He's functioning entirely on duty," one aide whispered to a reporter. "It's like he switched off everything else inside himself." Outside, the sound of the crowd drifted through the thick castle walls. Some people shouted words of support and encouragement. Others sang the national anthem softly, as if afraid to disturb the stillness and solemnity of the moment. When William finally stepped outside for a brief public appearance, the reaction was immediate and powerful. The entire crowd fell silent, with cameras only flashing after he raised a hand in acknowledgement. He wore a dark navy suit, the exact same one he had chosen for his father's coronation rehearsals a year earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching. How do you think William found the strength to face that crowd? In that precise moment, William wasn't the prince the public had watched grow up from a boy into a man. He was something else entirely, something deeper and more significant. The world saw a man suspended between two titles, a son praying desperately for his father's recovery, and a leader forced to act as if that recovery might never actually come. His eyes were steady and focused, but there was an unmistakable exhaustion and fatigue visible behind them. Someone in the crowd called out loudly, "We're with you!" And for the briefest second, his expression softened into genuine gratitude. By the afternoon, the chant outside Buckingham Palace had changed from "Save the King" to "Stand by the Prince." It was a small but absolutely seismic shift in sentiment, a nation's emotional allegiance moving from one man to another without a single official royal decree or announcement. As dusk fell over London, the floodlights illuminated the palace facade, casting long dramatic shadows across the courtyard. The world waited anxiously for an update that never actually came. Inside those walls, William returned to his father's bedside, holding his hand in complete silence. Outside, the headlines declared him Britain's beating heart in an uncertain hour. And somewhere between those two realities, duty and love, hope and fear, history was being written once again. Not in ceremony or grand proclamation, but in the quiet endurance of a son who refused to let the crown define his basic humanity. What lesson do you think the world can learn from William's grace under pressure? As the world watched intently, the British monarchy entered a stage so delicate and fragile that even longtime insiders described it as balancing on whispers. King Charles remained under intensive medical observation inside Windsor Castle, while Prince William quietly assumed nearly all state responsibilities. A transition so subtle and gradual that only legal scholars and royal aides could truly decipher its exact boundaries. Under British constitutional law, no monarch can simply hand over the crown just because of illness. The mechanism that governs such moments is something called the Regency Acts, a network of laws dating all the way back to 1937. These laws outline very clearly who can act if the sovereign becomes unable to perform their duties. But triggering these laws requires an official declaration from both Parliament and something called the Privy Council, something that hadn't happened yet at this point. Instead, the palace invoked a quieter, less dramatic tradition, the appointment of councillors of state. These individuals, typically the spouse of the monarch and the next 4 adults in the line of succession, are legally authorized to carry out royal duties on a temporary basis. That meant Camilla and William now held the keys to royal continuity and the smooth functioning of the monarchy. For William specifically, the responsibility came with invisible chains and restrictions. He was performing his father's duties in his father's name, but with absolutely none of the authority or freedom that comes with being an actual reigning monarch. Each paper he signed required careful consultation and approval. Every single decision had to align perfectly with his father's known wishes and preferences. Insiders described it as governing in a shadow, leading without truly having the power to lead. Can you imagine making important decisions while constantly wondering what your father would want? Still, William's composure and calm demeanor impressed even the most experienced and seasoned courtiers who had served the royal family for decades. The Prime Minister's office released a short but significant statement, noting that the Prince of Wales had chaired key governmental briefings on behalf of His Majesty, a rare public acknowledgement that confirmed just how much had truly changed behind the scenes. Behind closed doors, the entire machinery of government continued to operate smoothly. Documents moved between Clarence House, Downing Street, and the Privy Council office with extraordinary precision and efficiency. Every single morning, a sealed red box still arrived right on schedule. Its destination had simply changed from the King's study to William's desk. One aide later told a reporter that the young prince spent countless hours reading carefully through state papers, filling the margins with careful, thoughtful notes. "He treats every single page," the aide said with admiration, "as if his father will read it when he wakes up." The British public, meanwhile, responded with an overwhelming wave of empathy and support. A national opinion poll showed that more than 80% of people surveyed believed William had handled the entire crisis with impressive dignity and restraint. That figure mirrored an earlier poll from Queen Elizabeth's final years. A clear sign, analysts said, that trust in the monarchy was transferring naturally and smoothly to the next generation of leadership. In talk shows and newspapers across the country, commentators praised his steadfast, calm, and measured approach. Even longtime critics of the royal institution found themselves genuinely moved by his behavior. "This is what constitutional monarchy looks like at its very best," one newspaper columnist wrote. "Continuity without chaos, compassion without unnecessary spectacle." What quality do you admire most in William's handling of this situation? Yet beneath the calm surface, a quiet unease persisted and grew stronger. The longer the king's recovery stretched on without clear improvement, the louder one particular question grew in people's minds. When exactly does temporary stewardship become something more permanent? Constitutional experts began warning publicly that the palace would soon have to officially clarify the precise limits of William's authority and decision-making power. But for the time being, keeping things ambiguous actually worked in everyone's favor. It preserved the king's dignity while buying precious time for his recovery. One particular evening, as rain swept dramatically across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle, William met privately with senior advisors in the ornate crimson drawing room. The conversation, according to a trusted insider who was present, turned briefly but importantly to discussing the future. Someone in the room asked whether William had considered what might realistically happen if the king's condition failed to improve over time. William paused for a long moment, stared deeply into the crackling fire, and said quietly but firmly, "That's not a bridge I'm ready to cross yet." Outside the room, the ancient castle clock struck 9 times, echoing through the halls. The lights inside flickered momentarily, but did not fade or go out. For all the detailed rules and complex laws that govern the British monarchy and its succession, nothing written on paper could legislate or control the deep ache of a son watching his beloved father slip gradually into medical uncertainty. The realm and the nation might have found stability and reassurance in William's outward calm, but within the thick stone walls of Windsor Castle, the heavy silence still felt disturbingly like the tense edge of an approaching storm. How long can someone stay strong before the weight becomes too much to bear? The dawn of October 22nd broke quietly and gently over Windsor Castle. The thick fog that had cloaked and surrounded the castle for several days seemed to lift just enough to reveal a pale, cold Sunday morning. Reporters who had spent multiple sleepless nights waiting, anxiously beyond the massive gates, huddled closely over steaming coffee cups and whispered, updates that absolutely no one could officially confirm or deny. Inside those walls, the palace had slipped into a steady rhythm of solemn, focused calm, doctors checking vital signs regularly, aides delivering sealed envelopes containing important documents, and Prince William moving purposefully from corridor to corridor, like a man caught suspended between 2 entirely different worlds. The official statement from Buckingham Palace that Sunday morning was carefully measured and restrained. His Majesty continues to rest comfortably under ongoing medical supervision. The Prince of Wales remains at Windsor to support both his father and the nation during this time. It was essentially the same sentence repeated word for word in every single broadcast across the entire country. But to those who had been watching and listening closely for days, it now carried a distinctly new undertone, a tone of acceptance, The specific kind of acceptance that gradually comes when both a family and an entire country slowly realizes that control has its natural limits. For William personally, those limits had become achingly, painfully personal in a way nothing else in his life had ever been. He had spent the past intense 48 hours chairing important briefings, reading through detailed state reports, and meeting with various government ministers, all while sitting physically just a few doors down the hallway from his father's private medical chamber. Yet when the official paperwork finally ended each day, and the long corridors fell into deep quiet, he was reduced to being simply a son, just one ordinary son, who still instinctively listened for the comforting sound of his father's familiar voice echoing down the hall. Do you think William ever allowed himself to cry during those long, lonely nights? That striking duality between duty and love, I genuinely think, is what makes this entire story feel so deeply and universally human. In the centuries-old British monarchy, formal titles and ancient protocols may rigidly define official duty, but raw human emotion is what truly defines genuine character. I clearly remember seeing the very first images released of him that particular morning, standing perfectly still at a tall window overlooking the beautiful East Gardens. His hands clasped formally behind his straight back, shoulders squared and proper, eyes fixed intently on something far beyond the visible horizon. He looked simultaneously both completely regal and painfully, vulnerably human, a man desperately trying to balance the crushing weight of centuries of history with the gentle tenderness of a son's love for his father. That single powerful image has stayed with me ever since, because beneath the glittering crown, beneath the endless centuries of rigid protocol and enormous public expectation, there lies a simple universal truth that everyone can understand. Even future kings are still just sons who desperately hope and pray their fathers will recover and be okay. The profound lesson buried deep within this unfolding royal crisis is definitely not about privilege, power, or palace intrigue. It's fundamentally about human resilience in the face of uncertainty. It powerfully reminds all of us that true leadership doesn't always roar loudly or make grand speeches. Sometimes, authentic leadership simply stands quietly in empty hallways, breathing steadily through crushing uncertainty, and consciously choosing compassion over panic every single time. The absolute greatest form of real strength, perhaps, is simply the ability to hold perfectly steady when the entire watching world is loudly demanding clear answers you honestly don't yet have yourself. What does true strength look like to you in your own life? It's surprisingly easy to forget that the British monarchy, with all its elaborate ceremony and impressive grandeur and centuries of tradition, is still fundamentally just a family bound together by fragile human ties and ordinary emotions. In profound moments, exactly like this one, the general public sees not merely the formal institution with its rules and rituals, but the real flesh and blood people behind all of it. And maybe that's precisely why the entire nation has rallied so strongly and emotionally behind William right now. Not simply because he's destined by birth to eventually wear the crown, but because he's currently living through an intensely painful struggle that literally every single one of us can immediately recognize and relate to from our own lives. The deep ache of anxiously waiting for medical news, the persistent fear of potentially losing someone you love, the fierce determination to somehow stay strong and functional when the person you love most in the entire world is slowly slipping away from you. These are universal human experiences that transcend royal titles. As night falls once again over Windsor Castle, the palace remains brightly illuminated against the dark sky, serving as a symbol perhaps of the steady light William now carries faithfully for both his ailing father and his anxious country. There's no formal declaration of power, no elaborate ceremony with trumpets, no grand theatrical reveal to the public, just the steady, quiet continuation of duty powered entirely by fragile hope and love. And somewhere deep within those ancient, solid walls, the king still breathes in and out. The entire nation still waits with held breath, and Britain collectively holds its breath right along with them in this suspended moment. Maybe that's the real beating heart of this entire story. Not tragedy or drama, but quiet endurance and dignity. The gentle reminder that authentic leadership is never inherited in a single dramatic moment or grand ceremony. It's earned gradually through every difficult choice made, every moment of silence endured, every small act of faith taken in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. What do you think history will remember most about these difficult days? If you followed this emotional story all the way to the very end with me, I'd genuinely love to hear your personal thoughts and reflections. What does Prince William's remarkable calm in this crisis mean to you personally? Do you see him primarily as a symbol of duty and obligation, of compassion and empathy, or as something more deeply and universally human that touches your heart? Please tell us your thoughts in the comments section below, and definitely let us know what part of the world you're watching from tonight. I love hearing from viewers everywhere. Don't forget to hit that like button if this video moved you emotionally, or made you think differently about leadership. And please subscribe to our channel for many more stories that uncover the hidden emotion, lasting legacy, and dramatic events behind royal history that most people never hear about. Because as the lights slowly fade over Windsor Castle tonight, one profound truth remains absolutely clear and undeniable. History may be officially written by kings sitting on thrones, but it's remembered forever by the ordinary human hearts that bravely endure them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.